Hi, students. This video is an introduction to the Romantic period. So I'm going to be talking a lot about what shifted between the Enlightenment and the Romantic period, and how Frankenstein, which we're reading in this unit of the class, sort of reflects the Romantic period. So we were last in module 1, and in that module we were focusing on the struggle for truth. And now, as we move into the Romantic period, we're focusing more on the struggle for power. And our main text in this unit, in this module, is the novel Frankenstein, which has the subtitle, The Modern Prometheus. So I want to encourage you maybe to pause this video right now if you don't know who Prometheus is, and look up the myth of Prometheus, because I'm going to be referring to it in this video, in future videos, and as we read Frankenstein. So you might pause this video and look up Prometheus really quickly if you don't know who he is. Okay. Let's go on. What do we know about Frankenstein? We're going to talk first about the big picture from Enlightenment to Romanticism. All right, just to review, we started this class talking about feudalism, a period in history where truth and power was all in the hands of the king. And anything somebody believed or understood about God, about anything, sort of came top down from the king. The king was seen to have sort of this connection with God. What the king said was what God said, and people just followed that. And we talked about the stratification and how people lived and died in the same kind of position in society. There wasn't any social mobility. And then we talked about how the Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment, were sort of a reaction to feudalism and a breaking away, when people like Descartes and Diderot and Kant started saying, oh, no, we don't have to take our truth from the king. We can actually pursue truth as individuals, which was an incredible, and knowledge, which was an incredibly radical idea for the time. And as we discussed, pretty threatening for the monarchy. A lot of people didn't want all that knowledge shared. They didn't want people to start thinking for themselves, but it happened anyway. And then sort of the culminating event in the Age of Reason was the French Revolution, which started off seeming like kind of a good thing, giving people more power, just as people were able to pursue their own truth and do their own private search for truth and pursue knowledge through things like Diderot's encyclopedia. People also were striving for political power. We don't want to get all, the power shouldn't all be with the king. We, the people, want power. So not a surprise that the Constitution of the United States was written during that time. The French Revolution happened. And in the beginning, it seemed like a really positive, exciting thing. But as we discussed, and as we saw in videos, the French Revolution got very bloody and violent. And a lot of people were killed. And at the end of it, people in France had a certain independence from the monarchy, but initially under Napoleon, they were sort of under a dictatorship. So very mixed results from the French Revolution. So after the French Revolution, early 1800s, we go in to the Romantic period. And the Romantic period could be looked at as a struggle against Enlightenment ideas. So it was a struggle to reconcile or put together or balance this reverence for reason and empirical thought and things like the scientific method with emotion. And a good sort of example of a romantic painting, and again, I should clarify, when we use romantic today, a lot of times we mean romantic like, you know, between a couple, a romantic relationship, a sexual relationship, Valentine's Day. But when we talk about romanticism in art or in literature or a romantic period in history, we're talking about this time. It's sort of a broader sense of the word romantic. And we're talking, it more means driven by feeling, might be a good way to think about what we mean when we say romantic in this context. So Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, this painting here was painted in 1818 by Caspar David Friedrich. And you might remember some of the paintings we looked at, the painting of the oath with the people with very straight arms taking this oath to die in battle if they had to. A lot of, you know, sort of Enlightenment art, not Rococo, but the more classical Enlightenment art we looked at was very clear and very orderly. And in the Romantic period, there's sort of a return to feeling and mystery. And this painting here is a good example of that. Here's this guy. We might have talked about the Archimedean point, the human taking the big view of things, sort of looking out. He's climbed a mountain. Maybe he's, you know, pursued truth and knowledge, but he's looking down at this sea of fog. Things are not clear. And this is a very romantic idea, the idea that there's a murkiness, a mystery to our existence. During the Enlightenment period, people like to think they could figure everything out. We'll figure out, you know, how to do something. We'll put it in our encyclopedia. We'll pass the word, and we'll leave this legacy. In the Romantic period, they said it's not that simple. And we know from looking at the French Revolution, it's not that simple. That revolution started with reason and devolved into violence. So people were very aware, no, emotion is in this picture. And we need to figure out how to balance our human emotion with our human reason. So characteristics of Romanticism. A big one is the importance of nature. In the Enlightenment period, nature, people look to nature to find kind of laws. How does nature work? And can we use those laws to, you know, improve our existence by mimicking nature? In the Romantic period, nature was seen as a way to create feeling in us, to think through ideas, to work out problems. Maybe some of us have had this experience. I think it's really interesting that during the pandemic, a lot of people started hiking because we couldn't go anywhere, right? But also, if you were stuck in your house for days on end, and then you eventually got out for a hike, you know that feeling of it kind of giving you new perspective on whatever's going on. That's kind of the sensation that the Romantics really believed in. Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was Mary Shelley's husband, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, has a line in his poem Mont Blanc: "The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor." So in the Romantic period, people had this idea that being out in nature kind of changed our thinking, improved it, refreshed it. And this painting by Philip James de Loutherbourg, An Avalanche in the Alps, here are these two kind of tiny people in this painting and big mountains and this avalanche happening. So there's this sense that humans are small in comparison to nature, and that nature sort of revives us and helps us see things more clearly. One characteristic of Romanticism that we're going to be thinking about a lot in reading Frankenstein is that there were a lot of concerns about technology. At this time in history, there was a lot of industrialization taking place. Factories, were being built. A lot of people were moving to the city, and Romantics had a lot of concerns about that, about the loss of rural life. William Wordsworth wrote a poem called The Solitary Reaper about this woman, working the land in England, and everybody else has left and she's all alone, and she speaks a language nobody understands. And it's really a piece about, mourning the loss of rural life. One romantic painter who really captured some of this concern. And when I say technology, today when we hear technology, we think like iPhones and computers, but technology can be, a factory, a car, all the things that change our world. The invention of the wheel was a technological advancement. So keep that in mind. And one really important piece of technology that appeared in this time in history was the train. And the train was seen as, kind of scary by a lot of romantics. Because of the speed, there were a lot of trains going off the rails. A lot of people were dying on trains. So the train was often sort of thought of as this ominous sign of technological advances. And in this painting by J.N.W. Turner, Rain, Steam, and Speed, it's really hard to see on this slide, but there's a train here and it's about to run over a little rabbit. So it's, it's this idea of technology, destroying nature, destroying rural life. And that was a big concern of the Romantics. By the way, if you feel good about going to a museum, if you're ready to be out amongst people again, the Getty has a bunch of paintings by Turner, and they're so much better in person. So we talked about Turner. He died in 1851. He was responding to industrialization and concerns about technology and social issues. This is another one of his paintings, The Slave Ship. Slavers throwing overboard the dead and dying, typhoon coming on. So again, just this concern about what technology was doing to our world. This is, I'm going to kind of breeze through these, but this is a painting you can see at the Huntington Library, the 6-footers. He was painting a very specific knowable place where he was from, not grand history paintings. And yeah, I'm going to keep going. Another one, Caspar Friedrich, focusing on the individual's experience rather than a group of people. Notion of the romantic, autonomous, independent thinker. This is called The Monk by the Sea. And if you want to click on these slides, you can hear a video analysis from Khan Academy. So some characteristics of Romanticism, a sort of nostalgia for the past and a concern about the loss of the past. Romantics sort of turned back to medievalism and the Gothic. This painting, Proserpine by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, was sort of a return to classical, the style of classical paintings. It was sort of interest in vintage, like some people have today. At this time, the British House of Parliament burned down, and when they rebuilt it, they made it look like a medieval building. Very much like Notre Dame in Paris. Also, a characteristic of Romanticism was a nationalism, a fear of other nations. This painting by Sadler was the Battle of Waterloo, which sort of crystallized England as a nation. So there was a lot of nationalism associated with Romanticism. Today, when we say Gothic, we think of somebody like Marilyn Manson, the black hair, the black coat, or whatever. But really, the kind of Gothic we're going to be talking about is more in the tradition of the Smiths, Depeche Mode, Rocky Horror Picture Show, or even Post Malone, sort of the brooding outsider who nobody understands. Let me see what other sort of notes I have about that. It's less about this look and more about this idea of somebody consumed by feelings. Yeah. All right. So elements of the Gothic novel. Let's see. There's a mess up on this slide. I don't know why 9 is up there. You'll have this list in this week's module too, but Frankenstein is for sure a Gothic novel. And these are some elements I want you to kind of be aware of as you read, or elements I want you to be ready to spot. Setting in a castle or an old mansion, an atmosphere of mystery and suspense, an ancient prophecy, omens, portents, visions, supernatural or otherwise inexplicable events, high, even overwrought emotion, women in distress, women threatened by a powerful, impulsive, tyrannical male, and the metonymy, okay, I'm gonna have trouble saying this word, metonymy of gloom and horror. Frankenstein is one of the first Gothic novels, but it's also a techno-Gothic novel. And what that means is it expresses a lot, as I was saying that the Romantics were concerned about technology. Frankenstein expresses a lot of concern about technology and science and knowledge and what we do with it. Mary Shelley was very obsessed with Benjamin Franklin and his discovery of electricity. And Frankenstein grew very much out of this concern about the state of the world. So there's a very interesting story about how Frankenstein actually got written. Mary Shelley was married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, and she, in the summer of 1816, traveled with Lord Byron and Byron's doctor to the Swiss Alps. And something very disturbing happened that year. They call it the year without summer. There was a volcano in Indonesia, though in the Swiss Alps, nobody knew this was the connection. And because of that volcano in Indonesia, the world kind of goes dark. The sky is very dark. There were ruined crops and harvests. People died because of starvation. And nobody knew what was going on. It might have been a mood sort of like at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Everybody was like, what is happening? We're all locked in our houses. But at this time, but we knew, oh, there's this virus, right? At this time, all they saw was that the sky was dark, crops were being harvested, and they didn't know why. So Mary Shelley and her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron and Byron's doctor are at this hotel or resort in the Alps, and they can't go anywhere. They can't go out hiking or anything because the sky is dark, and they're thinking like, is the world ending? And there's a feeling that nature has been completely screwed up by supernatural forces or something else. So in this climate, these friends make a pact, and their pact, it's sort of like a competition to see who can write the best ghost story. And Frankenstein is Mary Shelley's entry in that competition. I believe she says in her foreword that nobody else really finished their ghost story, but she did. So that's how, that's the sort of climate in which Shelley wrote Frankenstein. When we talk about Frankenstein in popular culture, when you hear the word Frankenstein, you might have that picture of the guy with the square head and maybe the bolts at his temples and things. But it's important to keep in mind in the actual novel, Frankenstein is the doctor who creates the monster. And the monster is actually, I shouldn't say monster, he's actually called the creature in the novel, or a daemon, not a demon, but a daemon. In the novel, Frankenstein, the doctor, is meddling with nature by creating the creature, stands to ruin humanity, or at least wipe out all of Frankenstein's family. The only thing supernatural in the novel is something that was created through weird science. So we're not talking about ghosts here. Ghosts are not the scary thing here. Science is the scary thing here. Bad science, science run amok. So one of my colleagues says to remember, sometimes in the novel, the creature is called the daemon, but it's important to know that's a different word than from demon. A daemon is a creature that can be both good and bad. And she said the way she remembers it is Matt Damon is Jason Bourne, who is also kind of a creation and can be both good and bad. Okay, so another thing we're going to be thinking about in as we read Frankenstein are types of heroes and protagonists. And there's a quote from Northrop Frye's 5 Modes of Narrative: "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." That's very much sort of the motto of the epic hero. This hero is superior in kind and environment to us, stories of gods and goddesses. Then there are tragic heroes like Hamlet. The hero has a tragic flaw. Hamlet can't decide whether he should kill his stepfather or not to avenge his father's death. He has trouble just making a decision. And then there are romantic heroes. The romantic hero is very emotional and very human. The hero triumphs over evil, but with great sacrifice. Sometimes the romantic hero is called the Byronic hero. So one thing you should be thinking about as you start Frankenstein this week is, who are the heroes in Frankenstein? What kinds of heroes are they? You should also be thinking about, where do we see elements of the Gothic novel in Frankenstein? How does technology and science contribute to these Gothic elements? How does mastering science relate to Frankenstein's struggle for power? So these are all things we're going to be focusing on in this module of the class. And a few other key elements to track in Frankenstein: adventure, travel, boats, hiking, mountains. When you start reading, maybe you've already started, we're meeting Walton and Frankenstein, and they're very obsessed with the North Pole. Which was very typical of the time. Ernest Shackleton was the person who first, I believe, got to the North Pole. Sir Edmund Hillary was the first person to climb Everest. And that was very much an obsession of this time in England, exploring. Another big theme in Frankenstein is education. And family, especially parents. And there are a lot of absent parents, a lot of dead parents in Frankenstein. And also friendship, connection, and companionship. There's also a lot of doubling and mirroring of characters who end up doing the same thing, feeling the same thing, having the same thing happen to them. So I'll continue with other things that you should be tracking as you start reading Frankenstein in the next video. But mostly I want you to be aware, as you start reading Frankenstein and you watch the other videos in this week's module, be noticing how the concerns of Frankenstein maybe are different, or a reaction to the concerns of Enlightenment writers like Kant, Descartes, Diderot, Wollstonecraft, Deguge, Louverture. If you think back, not a lot of them were writing about the importance of feeling, right? But that's happening now. The Romantics reacted to the Enlightenment thinkers, and we're bringing in something new. Okay, get reading and then go on to the next video about, it's just basically about the first 50 pages of Frankenstein.